Very welcome everyone to this seminar, which is a cooperation between the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, UI, and the Trans-European Policy Studies Association, TEPSA, which is a network to which UI belongs. My name is Gunilla Herolf. I'm a Senior Associate Research Fellow at the Institute. Today, we will talk about EU and Russia, and we will address some specific questions under the title Opinions on Russia, Convergence or Divergence of Views. We will have a discussion on how and why the views among European countries differ and how they may have changed after the Russian attack on Ukraine. And then a final question will be, are these views converging or diverging? But first, we'll have a little bit of a background to why we're having this seminar and the context in it. So I will give the word to Michael Kaeding, who is professor at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. He's also a Jean Monnet professor with a very long experience of European integration and EU politics. And Michael has also been a visiting professor at the College of Europe in Bruges and at the EIPA Institute in Maastricht. He is, on top of that, former chairman of TEPSA and much more, actually. So please, Michael, I'll give the word to you now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gunilla, for this very kind introduction and these warm, welcoming words. I welcome also you very much to this seminar here today. I'm very happy to be here virtually with you in Stockholm, but also physically, and having the honor to introduce you shortly to something that is and has been quite an exciting journey over the last couple of months, also quite sobering, the book, the TEPSA book on Russia and the future of Europe. It is a project that TEPSA basically put in place over the last couple of years as one of its flagships activities. Russia and the Future of Europe is the latest addition to this series. Previously, we had volumes on climate change, on Euroscepticism, on future of Europe debates more generally speaking. But this volume obviously couldn't be more up to date and actual as it is, and as it is here right with us today. The idea with this volume is to have more than 40 contributions, very short contributions on national perspectives. That's very important. So we basically allow each chapter to put on national glasses and to basically bring in the Lithuanian perspective on the role of Russia and the future of Europe, but also the Greek perspective and the Portuguese and the Cypriot and the Swedish and the Norwegian. And yes, we do not only have EU member states participating in this volume, but with Norwegian, but also with the Ukrainian chapter, with the Ukrainian perspective on Russia and the future of Europe, or with a Turkish view on Russia and the future of Europe. This volume is a very nice journey across Europe to get the full picture and not only the French and the German picture on Russia and the future of Europe. That's a little bit the idea of this volume. And this volume in particular has been, and this is quite important also to mention this, was written before Russia's war in Ukraine. But the interesting bit of this volume nevertheless remains well in place, because in the end all these chapters address very relevant issues that are still relevant in the year 2022. So it's worth a read. Very concise contributions of 3 to 4 pages with very strong, bold language and recommendations at the very end, addressing questions such as what is the relationship historically, economically, politically between your specific country and Russia? What are the public perceptions of the role of Russia? What is the future of your country's specific relationship with Russia? And to what extent, in what ways are Russian actors influencing your country's domestic politics and positions taking at the EU level? And how should we deal with Russia in the future? These are all questions addressed by all the 44 chapters of this volume. And today we have basically the honor and the pleasure to discuss with three of the authors their contributions in this book on Russia and the future of Europe. And to start off with, well, you already met virtually Gunilla Herolf, Senior Associate Research Fellow at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. And with her, we have here today also Lucia Mokrá, Professor of International and European Law at the Comenius University in Bratislava. And we do have Ramūnas Vilisauskas, Professor of the Institute of International Relations and Political Science at the Vilnius University. A very warm welcome to all three of you. Now, what we prepared for you here to do today in this seminar is that we will give all three of them a little bit of time to elaborate on their ideas on the following questions of how and why the views among European countries differ and how they may change and have changed after Russia's war in the Ukraine. So we will get, if you want, with Ramūnas, the Lithuanian, but also more broadly speaking, a Baltic perspective, as much as there are similarities, but maybe also dissimilarities. We will learn this from Ramūnas. We will then zoom into Bratislava and ask Lucia then to elaborate more on the perspective from the Slovak Republic. And then last but not least, we come back to a country most of you know best, the Swedish chapter, and also here very thoughtful and useful insights then offered by Gunilla. Each of them will be having roughly 10 minutes, and afterwards we will have the Q&A session, sufficient time. So please do make use of the Q&A function, which you find in front of you. You might have been already been made aware, but allow me to reiterate that this is a live recorded session. So you will be recorded here. We will be recorded, and you will be able to provide your questions via the Zoom Q&A function, which you will find beneath at the very bottom. And or you might want to use the comment function of the live stream on the Facebook page of the Institute. Well, having said all this, I'm very much looking forward to the first now series of inputs, and we will start with Ramūnas and with the Lithuanian/Baltic perspective on things. Ramūnas, without further ado, I would hand over to you. I'm very happy to have you on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thanks to Gunilla for taking the initiative to organize this discussion. Hello to everyone who is following it live, and I would like to start my intervention with a reference to another book, which was published in 2007 by the European Council of Foreign Relations. It was a study called A Power Audit of EU-Russia Relations. It was not as extensive as the book we are presenting today. It covered only EU member states, but I think it's interesting to look back into how some of the countries were seen in 2007. And Lithuania, well, generally all EU member states were categorized into 5 groups. And Lithuania, together with Poland, was described as new cold warriors. 2 countries only belonged to this group that was described as having most hostile relationship with Russia, and even willing to use veto in the EU Council, when it came to further development of EU-Russia relationship. You might wonder how other two Baltic states, Latvia and Estonia, were described. They, and also Sweden, were described as frosty pragmatists that were still happy doing business with Russia, but raising concerns about human rights and more generally the political situation and decline of freedoms in Russia. Slovakia actually was described friendly pragmatist with a group of other countries that were just focusing on doing business. And Germany, by the way, together with France, Italy, and Spain, you might not be surprised, were called strategic partners in their relations with Russia. So why at that time Lithuania was seen as a new Cold Warrior? I can give you just a few examples. In 2007, Lithuania already had quite extensive experience of Russia using energy supplies for manipulating energy supplies for geopolitical purposes. Just 1 year ago, that is in 2006, after oil refinery in Lithuania was sold to a Polish company instead of Russian one, Lukoil, that was bidding as well. Suddenly, for technical reasons, the oil pipeline Druzhba was stopped functioning. Of course, because of technical problems. That's always the case when Russia does something with supplies of energy. But the timing was very clear. And more examples like this could be provided, charging higher prices for natural gas to Lithuanian consumers compared, for example, to Germany or other countries, having quite a different view of the Soviet past, which also contributed. Politics of history also was to a large extent a reason why by 2007 Lithuanian-Russian relationships were rather cold. Vladimir Putin, as you know, saw dissolution of Soviet Union as the biggest geopolitical tragedy for Lithuania as well as Latvia and Estonia, all three Baltic states. It was probably the best that have happened in the second half of 20th century. And Lithuanian officials have been raising the issue of compensating damages done during the Soviet period by Soviet Union, and it has been rejected by Moscow outright. So these are just examples, plus of course more recent events of 1991 January 13 killings of a number of civilians at the TV tower in Vilnius by Russian soldiers, which were still trying to restore, to sort of bring back Lithuania into the Soviet Union after it declared independence a year before in 1990, March 11th. So, and yeah, another reason, very different views of EU and NATO enlargement. Russia, since Vladimir Putin came to power, was increasingly very hostile towards enlargement of EU and NATO, especially to countries like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. Lithuania and other Baltic states have been very strong supporters of further expansion of the EU. I should say that such relationship, such tense relationship and hostile, as some called it, was not always in place in early 90s when President Yeltsin became the head of Russian Federation. There was a short period of very constructive and friendly relationship between Lithuania and Russia. Each were supportive of the other's attempts to establish themselves as independent democracies. And well, in Lithuania, there were quite strong hopes that Russia will become a liberal democratic country. But gradually those hopes faded. And as I said, especially after Vladimir Putin came to power, the growing centralization in Russia, it's turned towards authoritarianism, which included also growingly aggressive policies towards its neighbors, became a source of a major concern in Lithuania. And Russia was seen as a threat number one for at least 15 years by now, even more. I should say that there is a strong consensus within the country, within wider population regarding this threat, which is a reason, I think, why there is also very strong support for NATO membership and why there is a very strong support for transatlantic relationship. Actually, when Bertelsmann Foundation conducted a survey in 2016 when negotiations between the US and the EU on TTIP, Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership, were taking place, there was a broad survey conducted in all EU member states on how public viewed TTIP. And the strongest public support expressed for this deal among all EU member states was in Lithuania, which I think is quite illustrative of this transatlanticism. And so when later Russia in 2008 fought a war against Georgia, and especially in 2014 after annexation of Crimea and war against Ukraine, for Lithuania these were additionally very strong signals that its earlier perceptions of Russia were true. There was a mobilization of financial resources in Lithuania to increase spending on defense after 2014. Active efforts to convince NATO partners to increase military presence, not just in Lithuania, but also in other Baltic states. And it has been done in Lithuania in 2017. German-led enhanced forward presence battle group was located. And I should remind you that at the same time, Germany was starting Nord Stream 2 project implementation with Russia, just to illustrate you the divergences of views among EU member states that existed even after 2014 events. But what we saw after February 24th this year, when Russia started full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine, at least from Vilnius, it was seen as a sign that other EU member states, which were still hoping that Russia might be socialized through trade, through closer integration, closer relationship, that, well, this German saying, peace through trade will be strengthened in a mutual relationship, that they also finally understood that authoritarian regime in Moscow is not looking for mutually beneficial relationship. It is driven by imperial drive and probably fears of success of Ukraine and other Eastern Partnership countries if they continue democratizing and moving westwards. So there is a perception that those differences narrowed down after the start of war, which was expressed in consecutive 8 rounds of sanctions that EU countries adopted until now. And Lithuania, together with Latvia and Estonia, have been probably among the most vocal supporters of those sanctions, together with Poland as well. They have also been the most visible in terms of technical, financial, and other types of assistance provided to Ukraine if measured as a share of country's GDP. Of course, in absolute terms, it's the US which is leading. According to the data from October, US already allocated or promised 52 billion euros, while all EU member states together with EU have committed 29 billion euros so far to Ukraine. So the difference is quite big, but if we count the assistance as a share of GDP, then it's Latvia, Estonia, Poland, and Lithuania in such an order which top the list of countries providing most assistance. Also, increase in defense spending has been further ramped up in all Baltic states, calls for more military NATO presence, and especially very impatiently waiting for Sweden and Finland to join NATO. That was a very positively received decision by those countries in all three Baltic states, as this is expected to increase security in the Baltic Sea region. So to conclude my intervention, as I said, there is a perception in Vilnius now that, well, as unofficially diplomats say, we were proven to be right. We were not excessively paranoidly suspicious towards Russia. Unfortunately, we were right, but there is also some unease what might happen after the war ends. What will be seen as a desired end of the war or the victory of Ukraine, because our Minister of Foreign Affairs argues that the final outcome of this should be change of regime in Moscow, which is clearly not the view held in some other EU capitals. So, as paradoxically as it may sound, the very much expected news of Ukraine winning this war might bring back those divergences and arguments among EU member states. Thank you very much.
Excellent. That was very thought-provoking indeed, Ramunas. Thank you very much, addressing a number of very important features that might be coming back now also in the next interventions, not only the Lithuanian, but the Baltic perspectives, and also at the very end, very nicely so, looking a little bit to the crystal ball into the future, what could be expected in terms of what comes next, and also the converging or diverging aspect, and your statement being very clear in that regard. We will be coming back to this later on in this webinar. Next one, and that's a little bit what we want to achieve today, having a journey, a European journey through the capitals. So we leave for the time being Vilnius and move on to Bratislava and to the current TEPSA chairperson for the second term. She serves, Lucia, you are serving. And you are also the author, amongst others, of this chapter on Russia and the Slovak perspective on this specific relationship between Russia and the future of Europe. You would also be given now 10 minutes, roughly. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail, and thank you all for hosting us today with this important topic and the presentation of the kind of ties which are existing between the European countries and Russia, because historically there are different types of relations, and some kind of a legacy is still present in different levels and in different ranges in the EU member states. And it's always good to discuss and get some light into some points which may not justify but explain why some of the attitudes and even the public positions or opinions are created in the EU member states, and that even if we are living in in similar regions and may share the common history that we may diverge from the thoughts and the objectives as well. So I will be talking about the Slovak approach to Russia, both from the historical perspective and also today perspective. And I also try to a little bit illustrate the regional perspective, very similar to Ramuna's, the Baltic perspective. So I'll try to underline some common, but mainly also diverge or different topics or points in the Central European countries, so-called Visegrad countries, the V4. Also, it will be quite challenging exercise, even for me as well. So let's start with Slovakia. I mean, like historically, the Slovakia, as the successor of Czechoslovakia, had the previous relations with Russia in a very formal way. So it means that there had been the Russia even present for more than 60 years in the territory of Czechoslovakia. Even in the constitution of the Czechoslovak Republic as predecessor of the Slovakia, there had been clearly stated in the Article 4 that there is a leading position of the Communist Party in the Czechoslovakia. So the link between the Czechoslovak Communist Party, constitutionally settled, had been directly linked to Moscow and to Russia. And for this purpose, it was very hard to somehow abstain or somehow exclude the Russia from the historical intervention in the Czechoslovak development as such. But after the decision of the both nations, Czech and Slovak, in 1989, after the Velvet Revolution, we started to work on the split of Czechoslovakia to Czech and Slovak Republic, and also the relations with the former allies or the former partners, including Russia, had been settled. And from this point of view, the Slovak Republic after 1990 started to individually negotiate its relations with Russia. And after the foundation of the Slovak Republic in 1993, there had been adopted the agreement later on, the agreement on economic and scientific technical cooperation between the Slovak Republic and the Russian Federation. So the main focus was on the economic and more like a science, technical, or even the mobility, the exchange of students and teachers, so capacity sharing and the experience sharing. And this agreement had been the only one for the moment. We had been able to adopt it as the sovereign country. But we have to mention from the beginning that it was not balanced relation, even if it was the economic relations as well as the scientific. It was always more on the side of the Russia from the point of import of the goods to Slovakia, and also import or exchange of the students, and always very less. So it was more or less, if I just counted, like 20% balance on the Slovak side and 80% of the Russian side. So it was very unbalanced economic and social or political relations. It comes to the counting when in 2005. The Slovak government tried to deal with the deficit of international trade based on this unbalanced relation. And just to illustrate it correctly, the deficit of international trade between Slovakia and Russia in 2005 had been in the amount of 73 billion Slovak crowns, approximately 2.5 billion of euro in 2005. So it means that it was something where it was crucial to set that this relation should not be sustained because it's imbalanced and it may even threaten our economic independence as such. But to get to this point, we moved a little bit forward as the economy as well as the country. And up to date, we have the share of the international trade with Russia, or in the time of writing the chapter. So it means in 2020, it was the share of 17% of our international trade, which was following the decreasing line or decreasing tendency, because in 2019 it was 19.6%, but still it was the 5th highest share of international trade with Russia from the European Union member states. And this came as a result of the historical relations, as I already mentioned, coming from the Czechoslovak history or Czechoslovak legacy, and later it continued as the Slovakia. This decreased tendency, fortunately, I have to mention, had happened with the strong help of the European Union. On our way to become the member of the European Union, we had been strongly supported through the different schemes and mechanisms, including the special mechanism of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which allow us to support the decentralization of the economy and building strong industry. So the dependence on Russia became lower, but still in some areas, especially the gas and oil, the Slovak Republic had been almost 80% dependent on the Russia import of these commodities. The relations, however, had not been so positive as the balance from the Russian perspective. The Slovak people had been always balancing, or if you want to say, dancing in, dancing out in this relation, whether we belong more to the West, to Brussels, to European Union, to the Western allies in NATO, or whether we belong to the big Slavic brother on the East as the Russia. At the end, the final voting in 2003 in the public referendum declared that almost 60% of the citizens who had participated are willing to become the allies with the Western part, with the Western type of a policy and the values which are shared and common in the European Union. And we became the members of the European Union. And since that moment, we very strictly follow the rules which are stated in the European Union law. So it means that even the trade and the relations with Russia are limited by the common objective of the European Union itself. The still positive existing attitude, partly in 2004, so it means that there had been still approximately 1/3 of the citizens who had been strongly supporting the Russia as the big brother. And then they perceived this positive attitude in our relations. Had been this positive public image of 1/3 of the Slovaks had been a little bit devastated by the annexation of the Crimea, which had been contrary to the international law. And even publicly, the Slovak representatives strongly support the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, which stands that the annexation of Crimea is illegal. And later, it had been even supported because it happened on the very similar timeline with the closed uncovering of the espionage or the presence of the secret service agents of Russia in the Czech Republic, which had been connected and proven connections with the accident in Vrbětice in the atomic plant. So therefore, the positive image had been even devastated in majority of the population. But I have to mention that still we are in some manner balancing with the existence and positive presence of Russia image in Slovakia, which had been, and this is quite interesting, which had been always assigned with some concrete person. So it's some kind of a personal attitude which is present not only in Slovakia, but also in the neighboring country. We can see it on the concrete examples of the former Prime Minister Igor Matovič, who during the peak of the pandemic in October 2020 and then at the time of June to August 2021, imported the Sputnik 5 vaccine to Slovakia, even in contradiction with the rules and recommendations of the European agencies and the European Commission. And then you can see this kind of a positive attitude to Russia, also assigned to concrete persons as the former head of the Slovak government, current president of the Czech Republic, current prime minister of Hungary, and even the former president of the Czech Republic. So the strong presence of the Russia in our region is always connected with the representatives, with the concrete persons which have a very close the political or ideological ties with the President Putin, and therefore with Russia, and they support the public perception in the positive way. But still, we have to be clear that there are the differences between the countries in the region. While the Slovak Republic had a very positive opinion on Russia historically, there is still some support of Russia in the historical legacy perception in the public as well. Just to compare, while in 2020 it had been approximately 40% who saw Russia as a big Slavic brother, in 2022, so it means after the invasion, the aggression of Russia to Ukraine, the 62% of Slovaks saw Russia as a threat. But we have to be aware, 37% of Slovaks see Russia as a strategic partner. So it's like the public perception is in this way still divided to 2/3 and 1/3 in Slovakia. The situation is different in comparison to Czech Republic, because their historical legacy is not so much strong. They had been always closer to Germany or to Western allies. And because they didn't share the border with Russia before, it is not so much visible, and the support to Russia or the positive attitudes in public perception is very, very low. Yeah, when we compare it with the other countries in like Poland, because of its historical relations, where the Poland had been very much somehow exaggerated with or threatened by Russian imperial aspirations. It was always a disbalanced relation, and the pool of Poland from 2022 saw still that there is even less support of a positive attitude to Russia, but 26% still see Russia as some kind of a historically positive brother as such. This is quite interesting information if we compare it, because the pool in 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, saw it positively only in 21%, so it's even increased in some way. On the other side, politically, the Poland is supporting all the EU tools and measures against Russia invasion, and Poland is the highest supporter of the Ukraine. 88% of public support the need to help the Ukrainians and to stop the aggression, the illegal aggression of Russia itself. And the final part in relation to Hungary, we have to be aware that this is one of the example where all the member states in some manner diverge from the Hungarian position, especially the position of the Prime Minister, which personally overlap with the objectives of the foreign policy as the President Putin. And this is even very surprising, because Hungary had the negative historical experience with Russia as well. And this is not in any way influencing negatively the positive public image of Russia in the country. And we have to mention that this is quite threatening or challenging as well, because even the different sanctions or the infringement procedures in relation to Hungary didn't in any way decrease the economic balance between the Hungary and Russia. And these sanctions even didn't have the impact on the attitude of Hungarian people to Russia's position as such. So even within this small region of 4 countries, you can see that we pretty much diverge the positions, but still have something common, which we have to be very careful, especially in the time of conspiratory theories, that there is still like 1/3 or 1/4 public positive attitude to Russia presence in the region, or seeing it as a strategic partner as such. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Lucia, for this very insightful contribution, not only on Slovakia, but on the region. You identified the Visegrad 4 specifically in very much detail, comparing, underlying the differences and similarities. Very, very enlightening. Thank you very much for this. And this also is probably already an answer to one of the questions we are getting in the Q&A, for example, by Hans Sjögren, from the CEO of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce for Eurasia, who actually asked the obvious question whether there would be a follow-up to this book planned, because I was telling at the very early beginning that the chapters had been written before Russia's war in the Ukraine. And that is exactly what we are doing right now here in these events. This is one of 10 events that are actually taking place in Europe, across Europe, presenting chapters, comparing individual perspectives of countries on Russia and the future of Europe. So that's exactly what you're currently experiencing, so to say, and all these recordings will be openly available via different means. Before we move on, allow me to remind everyone again in the room to make use of the Q&A function in the Zoom room and also the comments function in the Facebook. And with this, I move on to the Swedish perspective on Russia and the future of Europe, zooming back to you, zooming back to Stockholm and to Gunilla. Gunilla, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you, Ramonas and Lucia, for very interesting input into this discussion. I've been trying to compare with Sweden while you have been talking, and it has been quite amazing, the things I have found out. What I would like to say about Sweden is in many ways quite similar to Ramona's, which is interesting considering that we have a very different history with Russia. We have never been occupied by Russia. We have never been under their power. Still, Sweden and Russia have not been close ever, I would say. Like with all countries, we've had our wars. We've had our wars with Denmark, many of them, and now we are friends. We never became very close friends with Russia, even though we haven't had a war with Russia since 1809. It may depend on several things that have happened during this period. We have seen, especially during Soviet times, the repression of their own people, the repression of other people. We have had our own tragic events involving Russia, like the disappearance and then the killing of Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg. And we've had the very visible presence of Russia in the form of a submarine outside Blekinge in the archipelago, proving finally that there were Russian submarines inside the Swedish archipelago. But there were good periods too, and just like Ramonas and also Lucia mentioned, the period after the Cold War was a good period. We all had good intentions when it came to Russia, and in the Baltic Sea we had so much cooperation across the border, across the sea, as Ramonas well knows, and we included Russia in it, but it never became really as intense and close as with the Baltic countries and with Poland. Still, it was good. It was good, I would say, until Estonia events, the cyber attack in 2007, Georgia 2008, and particularly for Sweden, the real revelation for us came during Easter 2013, when a number of Russian bomber planes approached Swedish territory, aiming at Stockholm and an airbase in southern Sweden. And embarrassingly for us, the Swedish air defense was not very vigilant, but NATO was vigilant and sent up some planes. We think the Russian would have turned around before they would cross the territorial border anyway, but at least NATO was there and showed its presence. Then 2014 came, and 2014 was, of course, the big revelation in Sweden. It was the big revelation in the whole Nordic area, and we could see that the NORDEFCO, the Nordic cooperation, changed character with the attack on Ukraine. before 2014, it was mainly about common development, production of weapons. It had economic motives. After 2014, it was totally on territorial defense, nothing else. Not that we could do that much together because we were in different institutional situation with 2 non-aligned countries and 3 NATO countries, but we did what we could, and we realized that Russia was something else. Actually, if you look at the official documents, you will find it as well. In the Defense Commission's report, you could read that Russia's ambitions is to control as much of the former Soviet Union as possible, and it is prepared to break international rules of law and agreements, as well as established European principles to reach this goal. It's quite strong, and this was, after all, only the first attack. There was no question about what Sweden saw as Russian motives at that time. And after 2014, consistently, the atmosphere has been very bad between us. There has been an information war from the Russian side. There were accusations that Novichok was actually produced in Sweden, not in Russia, things like that. And there was a positive angle, a little one, but still, in the Baltic Sea. There were some possibilities to have a fairly positive cooperation. And that was underlined by then Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven, that it is important that we try to save some areas for good cooperation, in spite of the fact that on the whole, it was quite bad. If you look at the Swedish situation on the whole, you can, if you compare the population and the politicians, you will find that the views are shared. And actually, in a survey of about 2 years ago, including 14 countries, Sweden was the most negative country. The Swedish population was the most negative population within the EU, with 83% having an unfavorable opinion on Russia. Russia has been spreading fake news about us. Russia has been ridiculing Swedish accusations and so on. And this makes an impact on people when they hear about it, because we know it is not true. There are very few people, but there are, of course, some who have a great understanding and think that we are too negative against Russia, but there are fairly few, I would say. So then came the events, of huge importance for us, but it didn't come first in February. It came in December last year, and I think you will remember the letter that was sent by Russia to other countries, in which they, among other things, said that Sweden and other countries would not be allowed by Russia to move freely in the Baltic Sea, and it would not be allowed to get too close to Russian ships or to Russian aircraft. And this is very ironic for us, because this is exactly what Russia itself is doing all the time, getting too close to our aircraft without no transponders, quite dangerous for the big airport, Kastrup in Denmark. So this is what they are doing. They are accusing us of it, and they are saying we have to stop it. This is totally unacceptable to an independent country like Sweden, which is what the politicians told Russia. We saw the big buildup outside Ukraine, and still, I think, few of us, exception were the Americans, said there will be a war. We hoped it would only be a way to scare Ukraine to to do something positive to the Russians, but there it came. And then came a surprise in Sweden. And the surprise was that the popular opinion for NATO membership went up very fast, not as high as the Finnish ones. The Finnish one was lower than the Swedish one all the time, but then it went up and went far above the Swedish one, but the Swedish one went up quite a lot as well. And that influenced Swedish politicians. And it influenced, of course, the Finnish politicians as well. What happened was that Sweden and Finland decided to cooperate and see if they would ask for membership of NATO. And it was apparent fairly soon that the Finnish politicians were quite convinced. And when it became apparent to all Swedish politicians, I would say, that Finland would apply for NATO membership regardless of what Sweden did, that changed a lot. Because the situation then would have been that Sweden would be the only non-aligned country, apart from, north of Poland, I would say, in the region. And then it would be a very, very vulnerable situation for Sweden. And the behavior that Russia had against Sweden in December would become not an exception, but the rule. And as explained by the Swedish defense minister, at 8:15 on April X, I changed my mind. I think that was when he thought about that consequence. So this is what happened. I think it's important to elaborate on not only the last months before we applied for NATO membership in May, but even the period before, because the period before in Sweden has never been any dramatic change from when we applied for NATO membership. It has always been sad, of course, but also realistic of suspicion of the Russian attitude to us under the Putin regime, I would say. I think I will stop there and I will come back to economic issues later. Would that be better, or should I take them now?
Please take them now for a couple of more minutes,
right.
because I think this is also quite an important element and also maybe quite distinct from what we heard so far.
Exactly. It's very different from both, except especially different from Lucia's. Swedish trade is very small. The oil import was not that small. It was about 27% in 2019, but it was for refinery purposes. So oil was taken to Sweden and refined on the west coast of Sweden, and to a very large part re-exported. So it was related to economy, but it was not related to any Swedish dependence, because much of the Swedish oil comes from Norway. Not all, but much of it. The same goes with gas, even more, I would say. Sweden has now an import of 2% of it. 2% of its energy comes from gas, and about half of that comes from Denmark, and 1% then from Russia. So economic relations have never created any dependence, and they haven't been important in economic ways either. And I think this explains a lot about how freely Sweden often expresses itself against Russia. In many cases, when things have happened like Georgia, the Swedish statements afterwards have been extremely strong. I think it wouldn't be that strong if we were that dependent on Russia. And with that, I will end and leave room for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunilla, for this very insightful explanation and outline of the Swedish, but also the regional perspective, the Nordic perspective. I think you made a few points very strongly that things also changed, the Nordic shift you referred to, for example. and again focusing on similarities and differences between what we also have learned so far. Now, I saw that Ramunas, you raised your hand indicating that you wanted maybe to chip in and join in here immediately. So while you get ready for your short intervention, again, allow me to invite everyone who has a question to make either use of the Q&A function in this Zoom room and or of the comments function in the Facebook, on the Facebook site. I will collect those questions and address them and invite the presenters to address them one by one. But before this, Ramunas, I give you the floor to come in immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to react to what Gunilla said about the importance of economic interdependence, economic relationship. Actually, Baltic states case, and especially Lithuanian case, is an exception from the rule that stronger economic dependencies limit the freedom of maneuver of countries in terms of, well, expressing their criticism towards others which are their important trading partners. Because for Lithuania, not so long ago, Russia was the only source of natural gas. Actually, 2 years ago in 2020, I think I mentioned this in the book, Russia was one of the most important trade partners of Lithuania if re-exports were included, meaning that Lithuania benefited from geographical position of being a transit country, and especially our transport sector benefited from shipping goods from other EU countries to Russia and the opposite way, but mostly eastwards. And despite all this, Lithuanian position has been very critical towards authoritarian Moscow and its domestic and foreign policies. And I think this can be explained only by the threat perception taking priority over economic interests. That's why Lithuania established LNG terminal quite some time ago, which became operational in 2015, even though it involved, of course, additional costs. That's why Lithuania was the first EU member state this spring to stop completely importing gas and oil of Russian origin. There are no energy sources imported into Lithuania from Russia, even through LNG. As far as I know, some EU member states continue to import natural gas through LNG terminals from Russia, not just from the US, Qatar, Norway, and so on. So that just wanted to point this, that there is a so-called dominant wisdom that economic interdependences sort of make countries' relationship more moderate. But when you have threat perception being so strong that there is a strong political consensus to restructure those interdependencies, then they do not act as a sort of filter of foreign policies, and this is a case in point. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. That was a very nice elaboration on one of the important factors that have been coming up in all those presentations and also throughout the various chapters of the book, the importance of economic factors, and here the variation of those, do also the historical links, but also the dependencies, particularly in the energy sector. And we see a huge diversity across Europe, and with this obviously also making decision-making at the European Union level quite a challenge. Now, that brings me to one of the first questions, which I would maybe like to bring in now. And allow me, please, all those who have started putting their questions, that I will pick and choose and decide now the order myself, trying to make sure that all your questions will be addressed at some point. So the first question I would like to bring in here, specifically, since it also focuses directly on what we just listened, is the one by Jonas Tibiak from CBSS, thanking us all and then putting up the following question. The European countries will probably not have a similar approach to Russia after the war, just as they didn't have before it. Do you think this might pose an additional issue for the EU and its partners when re-establishing relations with Russia? How can countries with different views come to a consensus, for example, when to lift various sanctions? That would be a very concrete question put up for you. And that also links to the future relationships. A lot of contributions are about what should happen next, but maybe we take this as a starting point, also helping you again to underline your perception with your country's background, with the regional background, and also now the perspective of them coming together in Brussels on a regular basis, trying to make those decisions by consensus. How is that possible with all these differences? How would you see this concretely with regard, for example, lifting various sanctions? I have a look now at you and to see who would like to start giving and sharing some ideas. Ramunas, please.
Thank you. Very good question. And indeed, I think it will be an important issue, though I'm not sure if it will be so much about lifting sanctions, because unfortunately, I do not expect Russia after the war to turn towards liberal democracy. I think there are no signs that there could be bottom-up process of a regime change in response to, let's say, failure in this process in terms of defeat, military defeat of Russia. So if it remains authoritarian, I think probably there will be more or less continuous agreement that as long as authoritarian tendencies remain in Russia, sanctions should also be in place. The question will probably more acute and more difficult, which links to another, I think, point, how to compensate the damages done to Ukraine, its people, how to find the mechanism, both judicial, something similar to the war crimes committed by some people in ex-Yugoslavia, and the Hague process, or something specific process being established, but also economic compensation. What about using the currently frozen foreign exchange reserves of Russia's central bank, or other assets which are in the West? I think these are the issues where probably a lot of debates and will take place, and it will be difficult to find an agreement among EU member states. Another issue, of course, is integrating Ukraine into the EU, providing assistance and so on, but I hope this will be an easier topic, even though financially and also politically also very, very demanding. But yeah, I think it will be a difficult debate, and probably again we will see a bigger diversity of views.
would you see in this debate, and then I would like to hand over to either Lucia or Gunilla, but just to come back to you, Ramunas, would you see now also a different role because of for Lithuania and or other countries? You mentioned now specifically, you focused in particular on Estonia and Latvia, but because of the experience, because of your expertise in the region, and because of, well, you were proven right, as you said, or as you quoted, unquoted, a diplomat in yours in the Foreign Affairs Office. Would that mean that also the future relations, that you would have a different standing, let's say, also in finding solutions in that regard? Sanctions, for example, as you mentioned, and also the question was hinting at. Or will we fall back into, let's say, a very classic trajectory? Yes, there is consensus. Yes, there is the club spirit. Yeah, so the European Council has always been a very unique and particular institution, as we all know. It's not just the big countries, but at the same time, lessons had not been learned, and this is why we are where. Would that change now with the experience and also with your recognized expertise in the field?
No, I think the second scenario out of the two which you described is more likely. I think economic interests and other types of interests will prevail. I am quite cautious about those forecasts that after the start of this full-scale war of aggression, the center of gravity, so to speak, or the center of power moved eastwards inside the EU, towards Poland, Baltics. Some add UK to this group of countries. Some add Nordics. But I think when it comes again to the politics as usual, economic interests will be important. We see that during the sanctions debate, economic interests are still very important. That's why we had transition periods for the sanctions on oil and oil products. That's why we had, let's say, exceptions for diamonds, taking into account Belgium's interests. And we can find a lot of examples. And this will be even more true after the debate. I think the traditional sources of power in interstate relationship in the EU will not change drastically as a result of the war. Yes, attention has shifted eastwards, but when it comes to decision making, I think we will continue seeing probably Baltic states and Poland being, so to speak, more hawkish. Mm-hmm. But then the overall consensus will still mm-hmm. be forged through, through trying to find a consensus. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you very much, Ramunas, for this. Who would like to come in here? Anyone reflecting on the question? Lucia? Yeah. Gunilla, afterwards, please. Yeah, sure. Then we do a classical round, and then we move on to the next question. Okay.
A little bit. In a short way. I mean, like all the decision making in the European Union is about the consensus, so it's not always straightforward. And to achieve the consensus is the part of the negotiations, it's the part of the diplomacy. But in this way, there are two crucial points that we have to consider. The first one is that to achieve the consensus, we should not withdraw from our values. So even to build some kind of relations with Russia afterwards, or to make this kind of a position of EU to Russia should not decrease the values we build the European Union on. So it will be a hard dialogue when it happens, when everything will be settled. So, but it should not be, like this balanced dialogue, and we should not withdraw from the values we have. And the second one, at the end, we should be a little bit more foreseen what is the main task to have the relations with Russia at the end in some manner, like governed, regulated, agreed. And that's the safety of the European Union itself, because the Russia is the bordering country. And currently, when the Ukraine had been invited to start the negotiation talks, it's actually the eastern border of the European Union. And from this point, we have to have some kind of a dialogue or relations with Russia. When it will be the partner, we would be able to speak. And the main task of these negotiations should be the security of the EU, the security of the external border, and the security of the neighboring countries who are the member states of the European Union. So in some point after the settlements of all these issues, which even had been addressed, like when the invasion finish, when the people will be called liable, when there will be the decision on helping with the reconstruction of the Ukraine, and maybe even the damages payment and so on, then the talks about the future of the relations had to start. And we have to keep in mind both the EU position as well as that it is in the neighboring country, and we have to secure the relations and our Eastern partners. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucia. Gunilla? Please unmute you. We can't. No worries.
I was so eager there.
Perfect, yes.
The talks with Russia will, of course, depend very much on how the war ends. And a totally defeated Russia with a change of government would be quite a different partner than if we end the war with a totally destroyed Ukraine and Russia that has no regrets whatsoever about what they have done. I don't think any other feeling would be possible than a very harsh feeling towards Russia, if that is the case, which seems to be their path right now, unfortunately. About convergence or divergence of views, what we see now is, of course, convergence at the moment, I would say. Germany realizes that dealing with Russia will not change Russia, unfortunately, when Russia is looking out for new territories and nothing else. There are no common interests. France has always also hoped to be the mediator through the Minsk and through many other ways, through very close relations to Putin, in the best of all intentions, to try to make him understand what is really possible and what is a sensible thing to do for him. So there we have a change towards what is more common in the Nordic countries and UK. But then come when time passes and trade interests start to become stronger, I'm not so sure that the sanctions will hold. The other sanctions from 2014 have miraculously stayed, but they were weaker than the sanctions now. So I think it will be, for that reason, harder to keep the present sanctions. So there, I'm not too optimistic. Maybe they can be different, but still kept. Sweden has all the time been very strong on in its views that the sanctions must not be taken away unless the Russian behavior changes. But Sweden is a small country. There are bigger ones with other views.
Thank you very much for this. And this, I think, is a very nice possibility to line up or to address another question that just came up about now the future and also going beyond military solutions. I mean, I understand that this is obviously something we are all very much interested in, but if we allow to think and beyond military solutions, Jerkai Hansson actually puts out the question, there are only military solutions to relations to Russia? Question mark. Is there a place for other contacts? Question mark, such as scientific, cultural, professional. And that links also very nicely to actually the foreword of this book. Again, the book was written before Russia's war in Ukraine, and we have a foreword here by a member of the European Parliament, by the Finnish European Parliament member Heidi Hautala, who also at the very end, in her very critical foreword already before the Russia's war in Ukraine. However, closing up, and I quote, "Looking forward, not all that emanates from the EU's eastern neighbor ought to be treated with suspicion, much less demonized. Undoubtedly, the road to mutual understanding is difficult, but can be paved if people across the border can interact and communicate with each other. People-to-people contacts, twinning between independent organizations, supporting free media outlets, and cooperation amongst communities will not only de-escalate the tensions and rebuff hate speech and disinformation, it will also weaken enthusiasm for and thereby the legitimacy of any hostile actions." Again, this is a foreword that was written before the war in Ukraine, but nevertheless it picks up and very nicely links to the question we have presented here by Jerka Hansson. So is there anything else than military solutions? What about scientific, cultural, professional contacts paving the way for the future? Any one of you who would like to pick up this specific part? Ramunas, please.
Well, this is an ongoing debate. In Lithuania, the position was to support those represented who were, well, pro-democracy activists. There are regular conferences in Lithuania held by democratic activists, Russian democratic activists, NGOs, including also scholars, people from media, and so on. The main issue is that in Russia itself, there are not so many such people left. Most of them moved abroad because they cannot live in Russia due to the risk of their freedom and even their life. And that's why now I think it is quite challenging to speak about any sort of cross-border relationship, which would not be military, but so to speak, societal relationships, because at least as seen from Vilnius, and I think also from other Baltic capitals, there are no people left in Russia with whom to interact, because those who are left are seen as either silently supporting the war or trying to escape from being drafted simply because they don't want to risk their own life, but they were okay before they were targeted by this exercise in Russia a few months ago. So that's the key issue. Who would be those counterparts in today's Russia if it does not change, as Gunilla said, into a sort of democratic country and society? And unfortunately, I also agree with Gunilla. I do not see signs that such a change could come up either from the bottom or even from political elites who might be concerned about other things than democracy. But yeah, I don't see that happening at the moment. And then, yeah, it's not clear with whom such contacts and relationships could be held.
Yeah, I understand this from your perspective. Thank you very much for the elaboration. I will see whether someone else would like to join in from you, Gunilla or Lucia, maybe also taking into consideration or asking you whether there are any projects or ideas put in place for all those Russians who have left the countries and now represent diasporas in respective EU countries, and whether to actually sit down with them to actually think about a future Russia's future in Europe, that's another question that actually was put forward. I just wanted to bring in Robert Schönbeck's comment here. He says, the title of the study is Russia and the Future of Europe. How would you begin to write a book with the title Europe and the Future of Russia? Would that even be meaningful given Russia's current political trajectory away from Europe? So coming back to the discussions we just had, Ramunas, right, about alternatives to military and those who have left the country, there is no one left to talk to, basically. Are there any efforts in your respective countries or any projects to actually link those who left Russia and to think about the future, Russia's future in Europe? Who would like to, Gunilla, please? And then we continue with Lucia and maybe coming back to Ramunas. Gunilla, please.
I wish there were. I think that in the middle of a war, there is also a lot of suspicion about people coming from Russia. They may actually be posing as dissidents, but in reality, they are not. They are actually sent out by the government. I think that is a problem at the moment, but I do wish that this would take place, and maybe it takes place in private circles. That is quite possible, and then the rest of us would not know about it. But otherwise, I would also like to comment about the person asking the question about Europe and the future of Russia. I think that's a very good title, because Russia determines Europe in many ways. If Russia is the way Russia is now, so much of Europe is on deterring, because this is what Putin stands for. He stands for views that is not possible to discuss. He only wants certain things. And this, in a way, destroys Europe as well. This is not the Europe that we want. We want to have trade, we want to have cultural and other kinds of relations with Russia. And if Russia would change, so would Europe change in so many ways that would be positive. But I don't see any signs of it, but who am I to know? We have all been surprised in 1989. I'm sure there were very few people who knew what was to happen, and therefore it's impossible to say. But still, it is a very good angle to think about how much Russia determines Europe and how important it is for us to have some kind of preparedness for a better Russia. Not having any illusions, but still.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Would you like to continue, Lucia?
Yeah, I would like to a little bit get into that. I know that part of the plans, the national plans on the reconstruction and resilience, also count with support of the especially scholars who fled the Russia because as mentioned, they had not agree with the political the current political trends in Russia, and even they had been already partly in exile from Russia and in the European universities or research agencies. And I mean, those people who had been, in discontinuity with the opinions about the leadership in Russia are already out of the country, as you mentioned, and some of them are in the institutes and universities all across Europe. And there are a number of not huge number, but some projects including this plan for reconstruction and resilience, which counts with support of these researchers and scientists, which is quite important. But there we have to tackle and balance the public perception and some kind of a bias to them. and it would be very important at the time of different conspiracy theories and hoaxes, and all the information spread through all the channels, communication channels, to balance and to support those who share our vision and who may be in future, I would say even in the midterm period, the future elite of the country after the situation will be settled in a more peaceful way. Because as you mentioned, there had not been left some of the representation in the country, because those who had been in opposition to the current leadership are either in prison or out of the country itself. So this can be the position of the European states to find out and identify these potential people. But it's not only about the EU, because they fled to other countries like the Israel and US, and from this or United Kingdom, which is not the EU member anymore. Yeah. So in this way, it can be some kind of a networking to move forward in this way. Yeah. So this is how it can may work. And I see these instruments, I know already, like the different scholarships which are in limited way available to Russian researchers and university staff as a potential tool.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to give you, Ramunas, now the floor, maybe also bringing in two more questions by Björn Markstedt, because they are somehow interlinked. One of which basically refers to how is the control of Russian refugees, in quotation, done to make sure that these people are not Putin activists. That links a little bit to the discussion Gunilla came up with, and the bigger question of whether there are maybe instruments of thinking with those who have left the country about the future of Russia in Europe. And also the other question put forward by Björn, how can EU better respond to all lies? So the issue of misinformation from Russia, and if possible, find a way to feed these facts out to the Russian population. Also knowing, Ramunas, that in a number of Baltic states, the Russian population, those speaking Russian, and also the information, whether these countries could actually be an entry point, or what has and to address those misinformations and fake news concerning the war, Russia's war in Ukraine. Thank you, Ramunas.
Yes, thank you. Very quick few remarks. Well, the events organized by democratic activists from Russia and Lithuania are usually exactly about the future of Russia. But again, these are debates which sometimes remind me the debates that used to take place in Soviet Union in the kitchens of block building apartments. That was the typical place where sort of scholars, people who were thinking about change in the Soviet Union expressed, so to speak, ventilated their rage and their dissatisfaction with the Soviet repressive regime. But well, it usually stayed within those kitchens of block apartments. So I'm not sure how different at the moment those debates in Lithuania by various Russian democratic activists could be, especially having in mind that some of them disagree not just on the left-right traditional issues, but disagree about more fundamental territorial issues. For example, regarding Crimea, should it remain within annexed by Russia, or should Ukrainian territorial integrity be completely restored? I mean, there is no clear view among some democratic activists from Russia regarding this issue, and I think it is quite worrying. But actually in Lithuania, we have more active currently Belarusian opposition, including its leader Tsikhanouskaya, who competed in presidential elections in 2020 and was forced to flee from Belarus to Lithuania. And I think they have more established structures of, so to speak, a government, democratic government in exile. But even among them, I see a lot of quarrels and yeah, the question is how they can agree on the fundamental democratic issues, and the other even more important issue is, well, what instruments do they have for this? And very quickly about the other question, infiltration of Russian regime agents in Lithuania and other Baltic states from the beginning of this year's full-scale war. There is a very attentive check of those who are arriving from Russia. What Gunilla said is seen as a real risk, and therefore not many people arrive from Russia to Lithuania, except for, of course, those who are transiting to Kaliningrad region or back from Kaliningrad region to other parts of Russia. But otherwise, this risk is clearly perceived, and well, there are procedures of which I'm not an expert, but there are background checks and so on conducted in order to avoid infiltration of Russian agents into our society.
Well, thank you very much. Also, in view of the timing, I think I need to hand over to the principal organizer of today's workshop, and Gunilla, who basically will have to make a last final decision whether to conclude here or whether to give all of you another minute or 30 seconds to conclude and look and address the question, your views on converging or diverging with regard to the views. Gunilla, what would you suggest?
I think that the only sensible thing is that everyone gets his and her minute. But I would like to address Björn Markstedt's question here. First of all, I don't know how Sweden addresses this issue that I brought up. Then the other one I find very interesting. How do we deal with the issue of the lies towards the Russian population? From what I've seen from Swedish television, it seems that elderly people go for the state television. There's no way we can counter that. Younger people go for the media they find on the net. And there is our way of reaching at least the younger generation with facts, not with propaganda, but facts. Yeah. Then about convergence and divergence, I will say that in a way I have said it, there is a development towards convergence, but let us do what we can to keep it, because Russia is having one main goal, and that is dividing us. And that's where I end. So please, next person, Ramona, say.
Very quickly, I have spoken quite a lot already. Yeah, to respond to the question on disinformation, I would just add to what Gunilla said, that indeed there are efforts to target different parts of society with those using media that they rely most on, and to provide alternative, to provide real facts, which to them would be an alternative source compared to the sources of disinformation, doing that in Russian language, and this is being done in the Baltic states. But well, it's the same like with anti-vaccine disinformation, and actually surveys interestingly show that usually those groups who are very perceptive towards conspiracy theories regarding vaccination, they are also very susceptible towards conspiracy theories spread by Russian propaganda. But providing facts and using media which is seen as close, reliable by those segments of society, I think are the main ways to deal with that. And thank you all for this interesting
you would have the final words before we then hand over back to Gunilla, the principal organizer of today's event.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's very hard to conclude on this point when we are so much diverged and different opinions in the European Union, and even in the individual states there are different opinions as such. So I'd rather to look in a little bit maybe a positive but still very objective and rational way that the Russia is not moving away, and neither the European Union and its member states are moving away. And from the point of some kind of a human-centered perspective, we should look to help to sustain the unified position in the European Union, to stay strong, help our Ukrainian partner, and try to contribute to the termination of this conflict as soon as possible, even it may look like right now as a mission impossible. But let me quote with one, or finish with one quote of Madeleine Albright, which she started in her speech in 1993 in the ICTY tribunal. Like they said that there will be no indictment. They said that there will be no conviction, and that they said that there will be no imprisonment. And at the end, everyone will find the justice. So from this point, I think that we should focus on this long-term perspective, that those who violate the rules and the values will be found responsible, and that we will find the way of stay stronger and to build the relations with Russia in the perspective which will occur in the meantime, because that's very important, that we are living in this planet, and it will be very challenging a mission for the I have to say future generation probably.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And with this, I think I quickly hand over to you.
Yeah,
and I think we have to come to an end. Thank you.
What I would like to say is a big thank you to Lucia, a big thank you to Ramonas for your excellent contributions, and a very big thank you to Michelle for your excellent moderating of this session. And thank you very much to everyone who has been listening and for your very good questions, which we have really appreciated. Thank you so much, and bye for now. See you soon, we hope.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye. Thank you.